Welcome to Ignorantia Legis, your law school online. It is now the 24th of November 2020, and we are now on episode 32 of Ignorantia Legis. For this afternoon, we will be discussing political law. We have discussed preliminary political law before, so karon nga rin kita sa let's proceed. Okay, so and I hope okay na mo din ha kinsay atong available, no? Okay, so okay, so klaro na itong audio o video, I hope. Now, ngari kita sa part sa constitutions, the self-executing and the non-executing provisions. The self-executing and the non-executing provisions. Okay. General rule. The provisions of the Constitution are considered self-executing and do not require future legislation for enforcement. Exceptions. Principles in Article 2 are not intended to be self-executing. Principles ready for enforcement through the courts. They are used by the judiciary as aids or as guides in the exercise of its power of judicial review and by the legislature in its enactment of laws. Tondo Medical versus Court of Appeals in year 2000. The social and economic rights guaranteed in Article 13 are also not self-executing provisions. Now, exceptions to the exceptions. Article 2, Section 16. The right to a balanced and healthful ecology is self-executory and does not need an implementing legislation. Does not need an implementing regulation. Oposa versus Factoran, the famous case of Oposa versus Factoran in 1993. Article 2, Section 28. The duty of full public disclosure is self-executory. The duty of full public disclosure is self-executory. Province of North Cotabato versus GRP in 2008. By the way, how do you know that, let's say, Article 2, Section 28 is self-executory, the duty of full public disclosure? Sometimes we don't know. So, who will finally determine and settle once and for all whether it's self-executory or not? It has to be through a case of the Supreme Court. So, in this case, for Article 2, Section 28, the Province of North Cotabato versus GRP. Now, another exception to the exception. Article 2, Section 15. Article 2, Section 15 is also self-executing. Imbong versus Ochoa in 2014. Now, whether or not a provision is self-executing depends on the language of the provision, and most of the provisions in Article 2 are couched in non-self-executing language. Again, How do you know the exceptions to the exceptions? Whether exceptional or not, execution or non-execution, it's always about a decision by the Supreme Court itself in a particular case raised before it. Now, general provisions for Constitution. The Philippine flag, red, white, and blue with a sun and 3 stars. The design may be changed only by constitutional amendment. Congress may, by law, not a constitutional amendment. Congress may, by law, adopt a new name for the country, a new national anthem, a new national seal, and such law shall take effect upon ratification by the people in a national referendum. So that is very important. Again, what is very important is that the Constitution itself says that these things, name of the country, national anthem, national seal, can be changed by a mere law. But the flag the design of the flag can only be changed by constitutional amendment. Okay? So, lisod yan mga tuwag bar, makinomdom di ka na bar exam, makinomdom di ka na kung unsay ipasabot anang say which things can be changed by the Constitution and which things can be and which things can be changed, diba? Okay. All right. So again, only the flag requires a constitutional amendment for the flag to be changed. But name of the country, national anthem, national seal, they can be changed by a mere law, statutory changes. Let's call that statutory changes, or can be changed by mere statutes. Armed Forces of the Philippines, sections 4 to 5. Military men cannot engage directly or indirectly in any partisan political activity except to vote. Okay? So, military, hindi na pwede nga appeal mo partisan nga support mo na in a political campaign. The police force. These are general provisions of the Constitution. The police force, section 6. The state shall establish and maintain one police force, national in scope and civilian in character. The national police is now governed by RA 6975, which took effect on January 1, 1991. Consumer protection. The state, section 9. We're talking about general provisions here. Section 9. Okay. The state shall protect consumers from trade malpractices and from substandard and hazardous products. The protection is intended not only against traders, but also to manufacturers who dump defective products in the market. Mass media and advertising, section 11. The ownership and management of mass media shall be limited to citizens of the Philippines or to corporations, cooperatives, or associations wholly owned and managed by its citizens. Only Filipino citizens or corporations or associations, at least 70% of the capital of which is owned by Filipino citizens, shall be allowed in to engage in the advertising industry. So, mass media, 100% Filipino. Advertising industry, 70%. Now, government, the forms of government. Now, government is an element of a state, that institution through which the state exercises power, the aggregate of institutions by which an independent society makes and carries out rules of action which are necessary to enable men and women to live in a social state of which are imposed upon them, people forming that society by those who possess the power or authority of prescribing them. Bacani versus Nakuko in 1956. By the way, kung paspas atong discussion, one thing good about social media is you can always replay. Di na ako na-emphasize kumayo kay mahurot na itong oras. You can always replay what I said. Now, government, that was government. Now, what is an administration? A set of people currently running the government institution. Okay. Now, class of government functions. Importante kayo ni inigbar manggawas eh. Classifications of government functions. Classification of government functions. 1. Constituent function. It's a constituent function. It's a set of compulsory functions which constitute the very bonds of society. So, constituent, murag yung basic yun. These are constituent functions or compulsory functions. Compulsory functions. Now, examples. Keeping order. Examples. Okay. Examples. If you are understand this. Okay, tempa. Okay. Surang lagang tagit ang tanaw eh. Now, constituent functions, examples, keeping order and providing protection to persons and property. The fixing of legal relations between husband and wife, parents and children, these are constituent functions. Regulation of the holding, transmission, interchange of property, determination of liabilities for death or crime, determination of contract rights between individuals, definition and punishment of crime. These are constituent functions. Administration of justice in civil cases, determination of political duties, privileges and relations of citizens, dealings of the state with foreign powers, preservation of the state from external danger or encroachment, and advancement of international interests. So, that is called the constituent function. Now, on the other hand, there is what is called as a ministrant function. Importante ka na, constituent function versus ministrant function. The ministrant function is the discretionary or optional functions intended to achieve a better life for the community. So, mag-operate ba ka o convention center? That's a ministerial function. Dili na siya constituent function of the state or the government. Now, principles for determining whether or not the government should exercise ministrant functions. Ministrant, we're talking about ministrant discretionary optional functions. What's the principle? Governments should do for the public welfare those things which private capital would not naturally undertake. Okay, although it's an optional function, if that function is something which is not really natural for the private sector to undertake, then the government may exercise its ministerial functions. Now, another case, the government should do those things which by its nature it is better equipped to administer for the public welfare than is any private individual or group of individuals. That is the time when the government should exercise its ministerial function. Of course, when it exercises its constituent function, it's mandatory. Now, the ministerial function is optional on the part of the government. So, classifications of government according to legitimacy of the government. Okay. De jure government or de jure government. De jure government. Depende sa pag-pronounce. De jure government. Legitimate government possessing all the legal requisites of government. Now, de facto government. De facto government is a government lacking one or more of the legal requisites of government. Now, there are types of de facto governments. There are types of de facto governments. De jure mo kay problema ito. De facto governments. Now, government that usurps another government and maintains itself against the will of the majority of the force, the will of the majority by force or by violence. Government established as an independent government by inhabitants who rise in insurrection against the parent state, and any government that is established and maintained by military forces which invade or occupy a territory of the enemy in the course of war, a government of paramount force. Violence, insurrection, paramount force. And like, the Japanese government, it becomes a de facto government while it is occupying our country during the war. Now, common forms of democratic government. One is the presidential government, and one is the parliamentary form. Okay, mukuan sa standby sa takang mag-exon, ha? Okay. Sorry. O, nitanaw rin nato, kauman ron si Renato Baguio, si Felipe Mendoza, si Gloria Marcelo from Houston, Texas, o si Cecil Vines from Talisay City. Okay, salamat. Napadahin ta. The presidential form of government versus the parliamentary form of government. The presidential government is characterized by the separation of powers among the legislative, executive, and judiciary. The system embodies interdependence by separation and coordination. The head of state is the president, who likewise presides over the executive department. Now, in the parliamentary form of government is characterized by interdependence by integration. Presidential interdependence by separation and coordination. Parliamentary interdependence by integration. Here, the ministers of the executive branch gets their democratic legitimacy from the legislature and are accountable to that body, such as the executive and legislative branches are intertwined. Members of the parliament. Essential features of a parliamentary system of government. Members of government or the cabinet or the executive as a rule simultaneously are members of the legislature. This is under the parliamentary form. The government or cabinet, in effect, is a committee of the legislature. Both government and legislature possess control devices with which each can demand of the other immediate political responsibility. The government or cabinet has a pyramidal structure at the apex, which is the prime minister or its equivalent. Government or cabinet stays in power only so long as it enjoys the support of the majority of this legislature, so they can change their prime minister anytime, as often as they want. Okay. Okay, now essential features like the legislature for parliamentary form. Why? Legislature. So this is in a parliamentary format. The power to exercise a vote of no confidence or censure, whereby government may be ousted by the legislature by just what is called as a vote of no confidence. Executive. The executive has the power to dissolve the legislature and call for new elections. Away mo, dissolve mo ang tibuok legislature, tibuok parliament. Yan, no? Okay. So, preliminary provisions and basic concepts under our Constitution. The national territory. The national territory. Provisions on national territory. The national territory comprises the Philippine archipelago with all the islands and waters embraced therein, and all other territories over which the Philippines has sovereignty or jurisdiction, consisting of its terrestrial, fluvial, and aerial domains, including its territorial sea, the sea bed, the subsoil, the insular shelves, and other submarine areas. The waters around, between, and connecting the islands of the archipelago, regardless of their breadth and dimension, form part of the internal waters of the Philippines. That's Article 1, Section 1. The archipelagic doctrine. A body of water with islands, or the islands surrounded with water, is viewed as a unity of islands and waters forming one integrated unit. Okay. Specifically, the mention of the Philippine archipelago and the specification on internal waters in our definition of natural territory. Application to the Philippines. The waters around, between, and connecting the islands of the archipelago, regardless of their breadth and dimensions, form parts of the internal waters of the Philippines. For example, the water between Masbate and Luzon Island is internal waters, part of our territory. The water between Negros, the sea between Negros and Cebu, that's internal waters. The sea between Negros and Palawan, it's internal waters, that's part of our territory. The sea between Bohol and Cebu, those are internal waters. These are part of our territory. Now, treaty limits of the Philippine archipelago. In the Treaty of Paris, on 10 December 1898, December 10, 1898, Spain cedes to the United States the archipelago known as the Philippine Islands and comprehending the islands lying within the following line. So, Article 3 of the said treaty defines the metes and bounds of the archipelago by longitude and latitude, degrees and seconds. Technical descriptions are made of the scope of the archipelago as this may be found on the surface of the earth. B. The Treaty of Washington. Itong ganina, Treaty of Paris man to. The Treaty of Washington, November 7, 1990, between the United States and Spain, ceding Cagayan, Sibuto, and Sulu. And 3. The Treaty of 12 January 1930 between the United States and Great Britain, ceding the Tortle and the Mang-Si Islands, cited in Justice Velasco's concurring opinion in Magallona versus Ermita in 2011. So, part na sa atong territory. The Tortle Islands and the Mang-Si Islands, it was ceded by Britain to the United States. Now, composition of the national territory of the Philippines. The Philippine archipelago, with all the islands and waters embraced therein. B. Internal waters, waters around, between, and connecting the islands of the archipelago, regardless of breadth and dimension. And C. All other territories over which the Philippines has sovereignty or jurisdiction. It consists of territorial sea, seabed, subsoil, insular shelves, and other submarine areas. Terrestrial, fluvial, and aerial domains. Now, future acquisitions included in the national territory. The clause includes any territory presently belonging or those that might in the future belong to the Philippines through any of the accepted international modes of acquiring territory. Anyway, salamat sa pag-uban ka na kung magkaigsunan. Yan nilat na kutob sa itong oras. This is JT Benz, Ignorantia Legis, your law school on air, online, law school online. November 24, 2020. This is our episode number 33. Thank you and good afternoon. Bye.